one participant feature, multiple participants. No, share screen reports. It says recording. I hope it's recording. Whatever.
Yes.
So what it was interesting, why it's good, is that, there's this, it's a mystery film, in a sense. It's a mystery film. But it's a little different in that its central question isn't necessarily like this strong particular one question. It kind of changes throughout the movie. I mean, there's a central question of who is Kaplan, what is Kaplan for the main character. We find out in the midway that it's made up. But the movie is broken into sequences, and each sequence asks a new question that keeps the film interesting. In the beginning, it's like, what's going on? Why is he, brought to this mansion? Second, will he, clear his name to the cops? Then, who is George Kaplan? Let's find out. And then he's a wanted man. Will he escape? And then it's like, do I save this agent? And then, so he keeps asking questions constantly. So it's like a 2-hour movie. It's pretty long, but it's constantly interesting because it keeps asking questions, and the questions, there's no gap. And if there is a gap, they're very short. And when a question is answered, for example, when he's at the auction, like, how will he get out of the situation? He puts himself in jail. So he's not even in jail. Like, the cops literally take him to the airport for the next question. It's constantly like, there's always a next question. Sometimes the questions are overlapping. That's the way, So this film is great in that Hitchcock really kind of, he's the king of suspense in a lot of ways. And you see the techniques he uses. For example, the idea that, I forget people's names, but the lady, the love interest, the idea that she is working with the enemy, right? So it seems, he could have had that be a surprise. A lot of movies like to do that surprise towards the end, but he decided, just kind of, you milk it a little bit, it's a love thing it's just as much as it needs to be, one love scene. And then right away, Hitchcock shifts it, and it's like, oh, she's an agent. Oh, she's working with the enemy. Oh, okay. And now we know this information. The suspense is building. Like, what is she gonna do? Who is she? Why is she doing this? While Cary Grant doesn't know. So that's a suspense. That's that ticking bomb I was saying. Showing the bomb, so your character is in this constant state of uncertainty, and the audience feels this suspense. So that's a choice Hitchcock made. He didn't need to have her revealed then. It could have just been a surprise towards the end, or it could have been a building like mystery, like, oh, why is she acting like this? But he decided, I'm gonna like have that mystery a little bit in the beginning, when they first meet, have as much as it needs to be, and then I'm gonna switch it up and make it a different question now. Oh, why is she doing this? And then keep asking new questions. So it's about like the idea, how revealing information, or, this kind of magic box, this little mystery inside a mystery inside a mystery, like how you're revealing it, what you're revealing, what is the most emotionally compelling, and also what is the most emotionally changing. You have different types of mystery or suspense going on. The first is, will he survive? The second is, and then when she comes up, it's kind of, now there's a new kind of emotion that's introduced, which is kind of, love, desire, that is a new emotion that wasn't in the movie previously, and that changes up the rhythm. That gives a new emotion, that gives a kind of reprieve. This constant intensity needs sometimes a little moment of calmness. You can calm down a little bit, and then when the intensity ramps up again, it feels even more intense because you just felt, you calm down and then build it up again. So even the most intense movies, they have moments Even Jason Bourne, you know, movies that are constantly, there's a moment of pause, but that pause doesn't have to be boring. It still has to be emotionally impactful. And that's why North by Northwest did a great job in constantly, like, it's a 2-hour movie and I've seen it before, but I still felt intrigued by what was happening, compelled, and the twists and turns, and even the little mini beats towards the end. You know, he ramps up constantly. There's new decisions happening, new revelations, new things happening in a constant fast pace. And it really keeps you engaged to the very end. So that's why I thought it was a good example. It's used in many people. And like, what do you guys feel like the name North by Northwest means? Like, what does that mean to you? Like, why is that name there? Do you guys have an idea?
Good question. Yeah, I never knew. Yeah. Good question.
Huh?
Hmm.
You can make a theory if you want.
Hmm.
Like, iconic movie, pretty random name. Why
Hmm.
is that the name?
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. If you don't have a theory, I think I have a theory. I don't know if I stole this theory or whatever, but it could be my theory. But the idea is basically what the core of any film is that, you know, North by Northwest. What does that mean? So you're trying to go north by Northwest. Is basically the idea of all good movies. Like, you think you're going there, but you're actually ending up here. You're going on a detour, and you actually end up northwest. So it was, you know, he starts in the beginning thinking he's gonna go, and it completely ends up somewhere else. And it just kind of sums up all decent good movies should be North by Northwest. So that's what I think maybe could be the meaning of the movie, and I'm sure there's some other meanings there. Okay, so let's get into my ranting session now. Okay, cool. So we're gonna now go into scene, more scene writing. You know, we kind of went into character arc, story structure, emotional impact, and now we're getting smaller and smaller a little bit. And we're gonna talk about individual scenes, what's in a scene. A scene is basically a mini story. It has a 3-act structure similar to a story does. And we're going to go into that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, how you can, some tricks in writing dialogue, interesting dialogue, and all that. Okay, so again, you know, 3-act structure, what is it? It means different things in different things. You know, you have your setup, your complication, and your resolution. From an emotional standpoint, it means attraction, tension, satisfaction. And you have that also in your scene. So there's different, let me just see. There's different types of scenes. You know, you have your expositional scenes. You have your dramatic scenes, which is the more important ones. And you have kind of your spectacle scenes, and we'll kind of go into a little bit of this. But how you can, you know, the opening scene or how you open a movie is very important. How you open your script, and that can constantly change. You write a draft and you go back and you change the opening, whatever. But you can kind of start to think right away, because that really is how you grab the audience, but more importantly for you guys, how to grab the reader. Will they continue to read on? You know, you have, in exec's world, you have about 5 to 10 pages. If you don't grab them, hook them, they're going to move on and they're going to toss your script out the window. So you want to, if you have to, you know, ramp up the first few scenes a little bit. And there's some techniques to do that. Again, these are now, I'm going into like cheat code mode. You know, it's called the opening hook. So you can have, there's a few different ways to start. I'm going to list like 9 or 8 or 9. hero in action. Your guys constantly, you are already in action, a very dramatic, usually intense action. You have the second opposite of that, the villain in action. So you have what the thing that will be fighting, establishing the opponent right away. That's the second one. The third one is the backstory, or known as the prologue. Usually, maybe you see your character as a child. You see what their ghost is. When we take terms from before, the ghost or the trauma that is their need that they need to fix in the movie. You see that now. This type is become a little outdated, or sometimes it's not used so much. It's kind of a cop-out sometimes maybe, but it's still, if you really feel it's important, usually you can write it, but you realize that this prologue can be revealed in the movie, either maybe not necessarily flashbacks, but in character depth. It doesn't need to be said or shown necessarily, but you can use that as a technique if you think it's important to establish the movie. There's also
Batman Begins is like that, right? Batman Begins is like that, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that's one. A lot of one. Twisters like that. Her dad gets sucked into a tornado. That's why she does what she does. It's usually like why she becomes who she is that. Star Wars Rogue One starts like that. A lot of things start off with the backstory. Another way is spectacle. Some grand, awesome, amazing thing. It could be violence. It could be sex, basic instincts, something that kind of grabs, using that spectacle emotion, the emotion of thrill, starting off with that. Another is mystery, something mysterious, something that kind of builds your curiosity and your intrigue. Mystery is all about how much you don't show, but how much questions you leave the audience with. And that should be really all your scenes in different ways, but really start off with that in the beginning. And these can also be overlapping. They don't necessarily mean it's one or the other. They could be an amalgamation of any of these. Unique world. You have something very interesting. If you're in a interesting new planet or a different time period, establishing that world through this how unique, and that grabs your audience too because it's different from their world. You can have exposition, you have a Star Wars scroll, but people try to avoid these kind of direct, all about exposition is how we can show information visually instead of telling it. There's also breaking the fourth wall, where your character talks to the audience directly. American Beauty, some Woody Allen films do that. That kind of creates a storytelling, kind of like you're about to be told a story. Another is bookend flashback, kind of, which is Titanic. It starts in modern world and it's a story being told. So and then the actual movie is the flashbacks or what is the story of somebody. Life of Pi is like that, and you kind of come back to this sometimes, but you see why this old person or older person, you see their younger life and what led up to who they are.
Is Never-Ending Story a bit like that as well?
Never-Ending Story is a type of that, but maybe it's not the more flashback type, in that it's not about his life, but it is a metaphor for his life. So it is like that. And ultimately, in these formats, you want whatever story is being told and the present to entwine and connect and be very impactfully, emotionally. It's like, oh, you realize this person's that in the story. And Neverending Story does that so great that literally the worlds collide and they merge together at the end, kind of, which is what you want. That's a literal way to do it. They literally did that. Whereas other ones do it more symbolically, metaphorically. But it needs to, if you're going to use that format, it needs to connect to the storyteller's points somehow, somewhere, or it's like, why are we in this format? Okay, so I'm just gonna go through again a little bit some of the story points, but like more from a scene point of view. So your hero's introduction is important because, and usually showing them very early on or in the beginning relatively, because your audience automatically has a psychological connection with who you show in the beginning, and it starts to automatically root for that person. So establishing that is important. See how you establish. You know, Onward is such a great establishing. You know, Onward is like, it starts with a kind of prologue, you can say, of, you know, or a mystery kind of, also like, where did the magic go? You know, but then it goes to your main character in modern time, and it's such a great, you know, like he is trying to put his head through his dad's sweatshirt, and that's exactly what this movie is about, like him trying to be like his dad. And you see somebody, and then his head pops out, and that's the introduction. And I always, you know, every character, how I introduce them in my movies, or I like to think, how can I symbolically introduce them in the way that they are supposed to be in the movie, their traits and their feelings. And there's cool, interesting ways visually to introduce. I think that's always important. And then when you get, you know, you have your other scenes or whatever, we won't get into all of that, but some of the important ones, your inciting incident, what breaks him out of his normal status quo into this, it should be impactful. Whatever you choose in the scene, it should be really impactful. It should be really something that breaks him out of his norm, and it creates a problem. It creates a problem that needs to be solved. So in that inciting incident scene that you write, make sure that it creates an issue that your character needs to solve. And then you have your point of no return, is when he actually enters into the adventure. You know, it should be constantly full of obstacles, and it should be also important. So after your point of no return, there's obstacles. We went over that. Your midpoint is kind of, it could be in the middle of the film or a little bit later, but generally where the main twist happens, a big shift should happen. It shouldn't, you know, you're on their adventure, you have your obstacles, okay? That can run for, you know, 20, 30 minutes. It's fun to see the obstacles and him trying to overcome, blah, blah, blah. But after a while, even that format's gonna get boring. Like, just giving him more and more obstacles. Like, at a midpoint or certain, you know, your end of your second act or middle of your second act, you want to have some kind of shift, some kind of, his desire changes. You know, in North by Northwest, there's a lot of these. You know, he's suddenly, oh, now he's a wanted man. That changes the whole setup of what's going on. It's not about finding Kaplan. Now you have to avoid the police. Oh, now it's this. So changing the direction shift, that's usually a twist or a reversal. So you can't constantly keep doing the plan, counter plan, compound plan. You want to have these shifts in there, so you keep it fresh. You can have more than one shift, obviously, and then increasing the complications. In North by Northwest, again, it's constantly, the issues are more and more dire. You know, at first, obviously, you know, there's a matter of survival in the beginning right away, but then it's like a matter of $2 fine proving the police that he's drunk or not, which is a very small stake. And then it gets bigger, and then it becomes a manhunt. Then it becomes life and death. Then it becomes the life and death of this person, and it really escalates the stakes and the pacing. And then towards the end of the second act, you have your boiling point, which is where you have your darkest moment, where your characters and its most dark. And then the third act becomes recovery. Basically, your scenes become, how does he recover from this darkest point towards the final kind of conclusion? And your recovery, think about, you know, how is he going to recover? He's going to be broken down. in Starker's point, how does he recover? What are the things that helps him recover? Is it people? Is it new scenes? Is it new situations? Is it props? Is it revelations? And these things that help him recover, are they suddenly introduced in the third act, or have they always been there? And they should always be related to the whole thing. If they suddenly appear, and they haven't been established or been prefaced or foreshadowed, it's something called Deus Ex Machina. And we want to avoid this. This literally means the machine comes and acts as God, or Deus Ex Machina. It's basically in Roman times, in those Greek movies, the plays, they literally had this machine come that represented God, and it was like, oh, God comes and fixes everything. Deus Ex Machina, which is actually quite boring and not emotionally impactful, because it's like suddenly this thing that has no meaning or just suddenly appears and fixes things, and it's not the hero's actions or flaws or anything. It's just some other factor. So you don't want that to happen. You want the recovery stage, or that thing at the end that helps, to be very meaningful. Then you have your final showdown, and then you have your ending. Your ending is probably the most important thing of the movie. For someone who watched the whole thing, the beginning is important to hook them, but the ending is the most lasting impression that you have. So really think about what kind of ending you want to do. And if you've seen, Sal, you've screened my movie, you see some of, so the ending, I won't give it away, but the ending, maybe I didn't think when I wrote that and I made that, I was a young guy, I didn't really think necessarily about what emotion am I leaving the audience with. I didn't really think, and it left a certain type of emotion, and that's what I wanted at the end of the day. But now I think a little bit more about that, because it's really the thing that lasts, and they talk about, and it's really what sums up the movie for them. So you have different types of ending. You have a happy ending, you have your tragedy, you have your bittersweet ending, which is a little bit of both. You have your twist ending. It's like, oh shit. And then you have your open-ended ending, where you don't say yes or no. The audience has to kind of derive, maybe like Inception is kind of an open-ended. Open-ended ones are the more, to me, interesting. It makes your audience really think about, engage the ending. It's not just a period at the end that's like done, here's a little bow, fixed, finished. But it's really like, oh shit, you're still thinking about it after, and asking those questions. All right, cool. So that's just an overview of like the types of scenes you'll have, and to think about some of the scene in different ways. Now let's go a little bit into scenes themselves. Different types of scenes. Okay, so you have your three different types of scenes. You have your exposition, you have your spectacle, and your dramatic. So dramatic is obviously the most important. Your exposition is, new information that's being introduced. Doesn't always need to have conflict. It can sometimes be used to relieve the tension. But usually these are the boring ones, and if you make them dramatic and expositional, that would be great. And usually sometimes there's small, tiny little scenes, passage of time, when, Indiana Jones is traveling from one place, that little plane map they have, that's technically an exposition scene. It's a very short scene, but it's showing I'm changing from one location to another, and sometimes is needed to give the audience the right information. Spectacle scene is just something awesome that necessarily, like when E.T. flies on his bicycle, like that's pretty awesome, but it doesn't really show character or like doesn't affect the plot, but it's just awesome. Sometimes something iconic in Jaws.
That be the plane scene in North by Northwest when he's being chased by the crop duster.
Sure, yeah, that is also escalating the plot, so it's not just completely, but it is a spectacle version of.
Well, wouldn't E.T.'s bike also be escalating the plot?
Yeah, more specifically, scenes themselves. What's inside a scene? What makes it good? What makes it interesting? So we have our three types. You were saying E.T. spectacle. It does further the plot. Yeah, it does. Everything should, in a good way, do all of these things a little bit, revealing information about the character, spectacle. But some scenes could be a little bit more than the other. And a scene that's just spectacle, that doesn't have information, doesn't have character arc or conflict, but it's just awesome, is okay. If you have, one or two, it's allowed. You don't need it to be always emotional or whatever. It's just kind of grabbing the audience. Okay, so think of a scene as a mini story. Same structure as kind of what we've been going through, 3-act structure. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. What your scene should be trying to do, 3 things that it should try to do, is it advance the story, reveal character, and what is really the most important thing actually is emotional impact. That needs to be there. Spectacle doesn't need to have the other things made, but it has an emotional impact. Is it creating tension? Is it creating curiosity? Is it creating anticipation, surprise, laughter, empathy, So those are the things: advanced story, reveal character, emotional impact. And before I write a scene, I have my treatment, fine. That's like basics, what's happening from a story arc point of view. And then I like to have little questions or little things that I fill out for each scene before I write it. What is this about? And I'll go over the questions I use, whatever. But let me go through the whole thing and you see what's important. And you can have your own little checklist to see before you attack a script, before you start writing the dialogue, whatever. Just make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. And these are the 3 most basic things. Never do you want a neutral scene that doesn't do any of this scene, because that's boring. That can be cut. In this day and age, we don't have time for scenes that aren't necessary. It's expensive, to make a movie. You want to cut out all the fat. Obviously, the most simplistic way to approach a scene is, what does the character want? And what does he have to do different to get it? What does he have to do to get this thing that he wants? So that's the most core way. It doesn't always have to be your main character. It could sometimes be about someone else. And we'll go over that. What are the key elements that you should consider when writing a scene before you even start to map out what the scene will be about? There's 4 elements that you can kind of think about that really can change everything about the scene. First is, what's the purpose? Why is the scene there? The purpose to the story and the purpose to the character. Those could be different meanings. Sometimes it's meaningless to the character, but it could be very meaningful to the audience and emotional. Second is location. Where's the scene taking place? That changes everything. Are you in a public place with people in the restaurant, or in a private place? That matters to the characters. Are they going to be intimate? Are they going to keep their secrets hidden because there's other people? Or, is there a lot of stimulation going on? Is there props that I can play with that gives action to my characters? Are my characters are they at a fair and they're actually playing arcade games, but it's seen, what happens if you completely shift the location? I like to, and when you do John Truby's kind of exercises, and there's the whole scene, world building, what do different locations symbolize? That's good for me to have that kind of my directory of locations and what they mean emotionally. So then when I go to write a scene, I have a movie that takes place in a mansion, and different houses. Mansions are cool because different rooms are very different and interesting. And whenever, I need the scene to be more intellectual, okay, maybe I set it in the library. Oh, if I want the scene to be more, they're kind of fighting, maybe it's in the boxing area. If I want it to be more calm and serene, maybe I set it in the garden. So symbolically, that's important, not just visually in a background, but really, you know, how your character reacts to its surrounding is important, and the actions that are there. Also, time of day is important. It's a very simple thing you may not think about. But, you know, is it a daytime or is it a nighttime? Really changes the mood. You know, my first film was how I wrote a scene where they're kind of two characters are conflictual and a lot of like secrets are coming out, and it was written in the daytime because that's just how the story went. It's like, oh, it's daytime, you know. So I just assumed it's still daytime. But my producer's like, make it at nighttime. This is a nighttime scene. Like, this should be shrouded in darkness and like in the mystery of nighttime. And it changed. I made it nighttime, and I have to rework the story a little bit. So now there's another day involved. Whatever, that can be done. But by making it nighttime, it changed everything. It made it more mysterious. People are more shrouded. Light play is more important. You know, what is the light source going to be? You know, I had it be a campfire, and that added, you know, a whole mood. So that's something that's a simple thing that you don't think about, but it's again affecting your character's mood. Another thing that has to go with this is, you know, something again you don't think about, but think about it: weather. You know, sometimes if you don't know what to do with a scene, change the weather and see what is a rainy situation. Obviously, thunderstorm has implied meaning there. Snow, a sunny day, a cloudy day. These change the mood and affect your character's attitude. Simple things, little things, but it could help you if you're stuck somewhere sometimes. All right, now let's get more into your characters in the scene. These are some kind of little checklists, what you should think about when approaching your scene. First of all, whose scene is it? Think about, you know, usually a scene has one character that's kind of, it's about them. It's about their goal. Will they get it or not? Sometimes it could be dual. It could be many, but sometimes think about maybe this is this person's scene. Maybe it's not the main character's scene. Maybe the scene is about this character, what they want, really. For example, in North by Northwest, when he's first brought into that mansion, he doesn't know why he's there. That scene is not, it's not Cary Grant's scene. It's the guy, the villain's scene. He's in control. It's about what he wants. Cary Grant's just like, what the hell is going on? I don't know what's going on. So it's really about that guy's scene. So whose scene is it in the term of who wants the thing the most in the scene and is doing the most actions to get it, and who's active and who's reactive more. Obviously, the second thing you should think about is the previous moment. What happened before in this scene? You know, everything is a cause and effect. Everything, you should be a cause and effect. So you really have to think about what happened before. What are their attitudes? You know, what is the feelings that, you know, they have to carry on. It's not like suddenly in a, you know, disconnected. Like if he's upset in the previous, that upset is carrying on into this scene. If he had a growth here, that growth is carrying on. If he learned some new information, how is he applying that new information in this scene? So feelings and attitudes, they change. And same goes with after the scene is, how is this scene going to affect the rest of it? The main thing that really you need to think about is the objective. The objectives of your scene is basically the desire, you know, the many desires. You have your overarching desire in the movie, but every scene should have a desire. Some character wants something. It could be the main character, whatever, and it could be multiple characters wanting different things, or this two characters want the same thing that cause conflict. Someone, I forget who said it, but they kind of reworded this. Objective means it's really, scenes are about how people negotiate and create relationships. Because really, when I say how they want something, usually how they get that is by manipulating a relationship with someone. Usually it involves another person and how I can negotiate and change this relationship so I can get what I want. Even if my want is a physical thing, I have to, if I need to get this job, I need to impress this boss that's interviewing me. So it's about negotiating a relationship. That movies are about characters, and how they want and what they want is all about people and how they change and develop relationships to get what they want. So really, objectives, you see them, rethink them as relationships, how I can change a relationship to get what I want. Almost everything can be worded in that way. So, all right, cool. So when you know what they want, think about what their plan is in that scene. What are they going to do to get what they want? What is their action? What is their plan? Everything should be in form of an action. Even if it's words being said, that can be an action. I need to impress the interviewer to get the job. So my plan is to impress, is an action. I can do that through words, but I must impress. That is the main thing. Now so you set up, you have your main objective in the scene. You have to have now conflict. We gotta push that muscle. My teachers they really focused on this part. They maybe not have focused on the other things, which was important, but they really made me focus on conflict, creating conflict. You can have a job interview go very well and very easy, and it's boring. That's not why we're here to see an interview go well. We want to see an interview go horribly wrong, and the boss turning out to be the person he just slept with, or turning out to be his villain, or turning out to, or just hates him and is having a bad day, and that guy, conflict. So without conflict, it just becomes exposition, just information, and that's not so fun. And again, your conflict isn't just an argument. It shouldn't be without core emotion. It should be, internal, external, interpersonal, whatever, but it shouldn't be just yes and no, yes and no, yes and no, back and forth. It should be it shouldn't be static. It should be building. People's opinions should be changing. There should be some change happening. That's the most important thing in a scene, is there's a mini change that happens. The beginning and the end are different. Something happened. So your conflict should be meaningful and not just a back and forth. Even your villain should start seeing a different point of view through the conflict. Even your character, maybe, there's really 3 things that could happen by the end of the scene. Either your character gets what he wants, your character compromises, or your character doesn't get what he wants. And it should be one of those 3. It shouldn't be, unanswered. A bigger question might be unanswered, but your mini objective of that scene should have one of those 3 outcomes. What he wants, doesn't get what he wants, compromises. And consider, if he constantly is getting what he wants, then it's just an upward motion. That's boring too. Consider scenes where he doesn't get what he wants, how he has to deal with that in the next scene. Consider ways that he has to compromise. He gets what he wants, but he has to give up something else, which creates more conflict and motion later. You want to also consider what the stakes are. Why does he want this thing? What happens if he fails? What happens if he succeeds? How you can increase the stakes as much as possible, makes it more tense, make it bigger. You have, within a scene now, you have your beats. Now, beats are like the smallest component of a dramatic scene. You have your biggest thing, and then you have your sequences, and then you have your scene, and then you have your beats, which are the most simplest form of drama, which is basically you have a new thought, you have an action, you have a reaction to that, and you have an emotion to that. And a scene could have a lot of different beats in it. And that can help you to kind of organize your scene. A bonus is if the reaction to the beat is unpredictable. that's something you want to, try to like explore. You have a simple like breakup scene. They're fighting. You know their reaction. Oh, okay. So someone finds out someone's cheating. The wife finds out the husband's cheating. You've seen the scene so many times. You know what the reaction's going to be to this question. But what if you explored, something new, unpredictable, not something that's not reasonable or logical, just for the sake of shock, but something that is new and refreshing. You have a scene where, they're breaking up. What if and the husband's like, I'm leaving you. And, the normal reaction would be like, oh, crying and why? No, don't do it. But what if you had a more like curiosity? It's like, oh, is she beautiful? Like she wants to know, or is it like, maybe it's guilt. It's like, oh, is it my fault? Or what did I do wrong? Or like, or happiness. It's like, oh, cool. Finally, I can change the study into, my workshop, something, to explore reactions that are not predictable, to avoid those cliche, because we're going to ultimately involve cliche scenes in that the scene has been done in human lives before. Breakups, you can have that in a movie. That's happens in life. But see in those mini beats how you can create reactions that are not so predictable. Because once the audience starts predicting, then they're not asking questions. They're just passively like watching, and it's like, oh, I know what's gonna happen. I know what's gonna happen. That's boring. So you have also an important aspect is exposition, is conveying information to your audience. You do need to do that. We kind of hate the word exposition in the sense that actors hate. I think Humphrey Bogart had like a very like common like thing he said. It's like, if I'm ever gonna deliver exposition, there better be like two camels like banging behind me, in the sense that there better be a distraction from the fact that I'm spewing out exposition that the audience doesn't even realize that it's happening. But because it's boring and it's not interesting, want to find interesting ways to give information, whether it's through emotion. Sometimes if characters are in an emotional conflict and you sneak in exposition there, your audience doesn't realize they're being fed information. They're just too much involved in that emotion that that it just subconsciously is taken in. And there's different ways to give exposition. You could do it through voiceover. You could do it through a montage sequence. You could have a news kind of playing. You can have, let me just tell Kat, it's fine. It's fine. You can have, when people first meet each other, that's a moment to kind of introduce some information. You can have signs, just a road sign. Oh, 2 miles to Las Vegas. Oh, we're getting close to Las Vegas. You can have title cards. Again, that's really straightforward and it's kind of boring. But, people do even title cards interestingly now in different ways. So you can see sometimes you must also now balance that your audience needs information sometimes, or they're lost, or they're confused. You don't want to be unfounded confusion. If you want confusion for them, but if they're lost and they don't know what's happening. So you do need to relay information if it's important to the story. Something you want to think about is your scene polarity. Does it end positively or negatively? More important is the change of polarity. Does it start positive or negative? If it starts positive, it should end negative. If it starts negative, it should end positive. Meaning something in your scene happens to change the outcome to a positive for your character. It makes it better or worse. Now that's thinking of it in a negative positive charge. Sometimes it could go from positive to even more positive or negative to even more negative, but that's not as fun as the opposites. Another writer would say not so much as polarity, but a change in emotion. And it should be glad, sad, mad. Those are the three basically the core types of triangular triumvirance of emotions. So it can go from mad to sad, sad to glad, glad to mad. So really think what happens in the scene that creates that. You know, sometimes I have a scene I write in my treatment where that needs to happen. It doesn't really there's not so much of a shift in emotions. So then I force myself to kind of okay, if I start off glad because I'm glad from this previous scene, how can I make them sad or how can I make them mad? You know, maybe instead of just having this be about some story point, oh, I also have that story point, you know, I need to reveal this information that needs to happen, but also she gets mad in this process or she gets sad in this process. And changing these emotions, so it's varying emotions, obviously, so it makes sense. Again, we went over gets what he wants, compromise or doesn't. Think about where you start your scene. That's kind of important. You know, you want to start, some early screenwriters, they kind of start off your scene with the introduction, hi, hello, hi, and then, hey, and then, you know, and then, oh, goodbye, all right, I'll see you tomorrow, at the end. But you don't need all that crap. That's just crap fat. You can start your scene in movies. You can just, we assume they've been talking before and they're just you know, there's a conversation in a cafe. You don't have them have to, you could just have an interesting intro establishing, you know, something, and then they're just already in the middle of a conversation and you're going right into the scene. You want to go right into the fun stuff of it. You don't need that extra stuff. You know, you want to have, you know, reversals in the scene, some shifts, changes. You can end with a question. You know, it's like, oh, I have a plan, you know. It doesn't actually literally have to be a question, but the question is, what is his plan? We want to know as the audience. You know, I've done that, you know, it's like, oh, I have a plan. We could, you know, sell the Gatal instead, you know, and I had that as the end of the scene. So we know there's no question there. Instead, I cut out what the plan is. He just is, you know, I have a plan. So the audience is like, oh shit, what's the plan? And I don't even go into the plan. There's another scene that happens. So for that whole next scene, you're like, what is he gonna do? And then he's like, oh, he's selling the kebab. So, you know, leaving with the question, leaving with the little thing, hooks, keeps you going, keeps you flipping the page. Those little tricks. If you give everything, then it's like, it's all there. Cool. Let me just take a little water. Okay, next again is reiterating emotion, the emotional palette. Really think about, you know, having your emotions. And I like to, what I've been doing recently is I open up the table of contents to the writing for impact emotion. If you go to the table of contents, and you have in the scene structure or something built, and he has like the different types of emotions, you know, what I went through last time, you know, suspense, intensity, thrill, and I look at that kind of emotional palette and I see, all right, which one of these can I put in the scene? And forcing you to think about this kind of forces you maybe put in some new emotions that you wouldn't think about. It's like, oh, I could put in a little bit of laughter here. There's a little room for laughter here. Oh, I could really play, this is about sadness. You know, so playing that, oh, you know, this could be really about the anticipation of something. So, and having different, you know, 4 or 5 maybe emotions that make sense in my scene. You know, having emotional cues, keeping it unpredictable. You know, unpredictable emotions could be interesting. Obviously, they have to make sense, and it's not just, oh, I want him to be angry out of nowhere, but would he just suddenly is angry about, and you see why it's a character trait. You know, all scenes are slowly revealing character, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. You know, you do your list of character traits, right? Who your character is, and you don't want your first scene to just suddenly dump all this character traits. You want every scene to reveal a little bit about who your character is, so you have enough to work with. You know, so you have other scenes have something about the character. Your first scene is, okay, show him lack of confidence. Okay, second scene, show him how he lies. Third scene, show him, you know, how he gets upset a lot. You know, so you have, each scene is about, you have something to work with, revealing characters, changing emotions within the beats even, showing emotions, not saying, hey, I'm really angry, that makes me angry. Don't say stuff like that. Just try to make subtext comes in here, be like, you know, he's like, oh, I'm leaving the mission, and the guy's supposed to get angry. It's like, oh, that makes me angry. No, it's like, instead be like, you know what, I'll do this. You know, he kind of gets become very curt, or very his demeanor becomes angry and upset. And subtext is whatever they're doing, he becomes angry about that, instead of herself. Whatever. Oh, I'll do the dishes. You can't even do the dishes right. You know, that shows anger, but not saying it. And that's, again, subtext is the huge thing here. And that's why your location is important. What do they have to work with? Think about from an acting point of view. If you're going to direct this, like, what makes this an interesting scene with blocking, and like characters have things to work with? They're not just people don't really talk like face to face. That's not a normal thing. You see that in movies a lot, but most people, they're, even when they're eating, they're like eating, they're not face to face, they're like reading, or their iPad, or they're like distracted, or they're like talking kind of to the side, and like, you know, they're doing things, and those things that they're doing and how they do it can reveal the emotions. And it's more interesting to see it revealed, shown, not told. So see what props you can work with. Also think about the reader's emotion. You know, what emotion is the viewer or reader feeling? Again, have your emotional thesaurus, kind of like types of emotions that you could play with here. And when you have that thesaurus open, you will see that, oh, there's some new ones that I could, when you have the language in your head or available to you, you start to use it more when it's more, when you're thinking about it. Obviously, sadness, anger, you know what they are. That's not what I mean. I mean having it there at your disposal and using it. You know, how is, if a character is resenting someone, again, like how am I showing it? Through bitterness, through anger, through deceit. So show what he's feeling through his actions. And again, flipping cliched emotions. Like think about it's a breakup. The reaction, is make it curiosity, or like think about something that would throw the audience off a little bit. You're compelled to write the cliche dialogues, like blah blah. And you could go through a pass, write it, and then you kind of go through again, and I go through it, and I see sometimes because I just want to finish the scene and get to the next scene, which is more exciting for me maybe, and I kind of just write it very cliche. And sometimes I go back and I realize, oh, what about this emotion? Or how about I don't say this? If it's more implied, it's more of a mystery, or if it's just very one word, instead of saying this whole thing, it's more interesting. And so flipping the emotion, and you also come up with more interesting, and it's more interesting because it's more, that character has a more stronger voice, makes it more interesting. Oh, cool. I got a gift from Zoom that they're removing my 40-minute time limit. Awesome. Best gift ever. And the only type of gifts you can get in this day and age. So flipping and it also gives them a voice. When you makes it more interesting, makes it more, oh, this is how this person talks, not a cowboy, a generic cowboy, but this is this, characters. Character appeal, think about, you know, the empathizing with the character. Again, making them kind of a victim is a technique. Having them have misfortune, betrayal, or abuse, you automatically have an emotional kind of empathetic connection. So appeal is something you will not every scene is about their appeal. Sometimes you show them as flawed, and sometimes you might hate them for that scene. So not everything is about appeal, but generally you want to build some appeal here and there. And towards the end, it's going to be more about appeal because they're going to be coming into their heroic metamorphosis. You want to have active dialogue also, not just reactive. You want them to be engaging and trying to really solve whatever their mission is. Okay, so now we're going to just kind of talk about conflict a little bit. I want to break down a little bit more techniques for building conflict. And you really should be writing a scene. You know, you're obviously going to be doing all the other stuff, emotion, blah, 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 character trait, blah, blah, blah. But the engine, the fire of your scene is conflict. Think about, you know, it's not just he gets this story point, he needs to do this, he needs to get that key card so he can get into that room. How can I get that key card through conflict? What are my obstacles? You know, how can we create more obstacles, more conflict? You know, my teacher would say, if there's not a conflict in the scene, just have someone accidentally spill over a cup of coffee, and that just creates, oh, why'd you shit? Oh my God, I'm like, what the hell? Why did you do that? You know, that's a gimmick maybe, or a crux, but it's still better than seeing a boring scene just about characters agreeing with each other. I'd rather still see that, even if it's a little cliche, then it's about how you can weave it naturally. So some of the different kind of things to think about, types of conflict, confrontation. You know, you have your two characters. Think about who will win this, how will they win it, and what will happen next. Okay, basically, who's going to win this? You know, basic confrontation. Another type of kind of conflict structure is interrogation. You know, there's a straightforward interrogation, but there's different. It's not necessarily police convict, but it can be a different way to do it. And some of the spices that you can add for conflict is impatience. You know, if someone's interrogating, I really need to know that. Impatience creates this drive, this push. Misunderstanding can create some conflict. Dramatic irony, these types of things create some conflict. Obstacles and complications. Obviously, you have your main obstacle. You should have, how can you add more obstacles, more complications? Okay, you have a car scene. It's fine. It's already dramatic. That you think your job is done. You've done it. But now a more proper, well-trained screenwriter will see, how can I add even more complication to this complication? You know, I have a car. Oh, there's more cars that come up. Oh, there's a red light. Oh, there's a lady with a shopping cart coming in my way. You know, adding more extra complications, adding more layers, and building it too. And why, again, North by Northwest scene, like when he goes with his mom into the hotel room to investigate, he just keeps adding complications. Like, oh, the maid comes in. Oh shit, you know. Oh, this guy with the tuxedo comes in next. Oh, and then there's a phone call with them downstairs. No, it's like, shit. So it's just like, it's not just the scene about him finding this clue, which is what the purpose of that scene is, but he's constantly adding complications. So really think about, you have your scene, okay, how can I add more complications? Like, oh shit, a bird flies into the fan and like there's like blood everywhere. Like, oh shit, I have to clean this up. Like, oh, when I'm cleaning it up, oh, you know, that guy saw me clean it up. Oh, now I have to fix, like, you know, adding complications adds conflict. How can you add more complications? Think about that. A big important thing is Inner conflict is a complication that you should be starting to add into your scene. You know, my character wants something, but it's not necessarily an external conflict. It's a flaw inside him that's creating the conflict. And it's because of this flaw, I don't get what I want. You know, I want to talk to that girl. I go to talk to that girl. But what's stopping me is not some other guy, some other hot dude or some other jock. It's my own fear of talking to that. It's my own flaw that's creating the complication. So that's also more meaningful when it comes from internal, when things come from inside. And again, think about not all scenes need conflict necessarily. There can be scenes with a little reprieve, with a little love, and they're in agreement. You can have that. I'm not saying you don't, but it's not as interesting, and you can't constantly have that. Everyone agreeing and getting along. You can have one scene maybe, but then again, they're starting to fight. You know, I like to have a scene. It starts off with, oh, they're in agreement, but then something happens by the middle of the scene that puts them back into disarray. Contrast again is important. You know, good, bad's happening. Your character's getting something but losing something. Also the tempo of your scene. You know, things are happening, but suddenly something happens really fast or really slow. These are important beats. You know, there's that scene in Indiana Jones, you know, where he's like, there's a sword fight, this epic sword fight, and the guy comes out into the sword and he just shoots the guy. You know, it's just like a quick, like that just changes the tempo. Like, oh, okay, that's comedy when you do some certain things like this. But changing contrast also in emotions, different emotions. If you have constant suspense, you know, what about suspense, humor, suspense, or suspense, sadness, humor? You know, think about how there's shifts and also objectives changing in your scene themselves create contrast and objectives. You want, you know, some new discoveries happening in your scene, new constant flow. Like, what are the characters learning? What are they, you know, revelations that are happening? You kind of want, you know, good writers have revelations. Every scene is not just about, you know, in scene. If you're going to write a movie like North by Northwest, which is kind of a mystery, suspense thriller, each scene needs to be new information, basically. That's where it's not just about character growth. That has to happen, but each scene needs to be like pushing him to the next scene. Oh, he gets this clue. Oh, it's not necessarily a clue, but like, oh, something dies. Oh, that guy in the UN dies. Okay, that's new information. Something needs to be happening constantly. That's quite a shift. It's not just about character growth. If you're running a character piece about character study, then it doesn't necessarily need to be new information that way. But still, small information, some ways should be driving your scene. Some interesting things is if it's the first or last time your character is doing something, your character's first kiss, or your character's last meal before they go off. You know, these are meaningful. They're not. It's not just a normal meal. It's not just a normal kiss. This is more meaning, and what that meaning brings to conflict and scene. So that's ways to create little cheat codes to create interesting scenes. Flashbacks, you know, different people have different opinion about flashbacks. It's important sometimes. Why flashbacks fail isn't so much that, oh, you know, sometimes they're not emotionally impactful because you're suddenly shifting to a different timeline, different characters sometimes, or a younger version. And those emotions are not, the emotions you've built up are suddenly shifted. But if you make your flashbacks also emotionally engaging and meaningful, then they have a purpose too. You can have them if that's the style. I usually, if you establish flashbacks, then have it at least one more time So this movie has established the grammar of flashbacks, if not 3 times. But maybe you could have it just once as a one meaningful, that usually it's the ghost, that trauma. You just see it once and that's all you need to see. If that's how you want to structure it, you could do it. Sometimes, show don't tell. Sometimes if you tell a flashback, it may actually be the better choice, because when you show, for example, in LA Confidential, there's a great movie. There's a scene where the guy talks about when he was a kid that his dad beat his mom, locked him to the radiator. His mom died. He was with his dead mom for 2 days before the police. That's freaking traumatic, emotional, heavy baggage. That's the ghost of that character. And if we had to see that scene, it would be too much, maybe. It would be too much. There's something to be said for too much emotional impact. There's certain things that just is too traumatic for the audience to see. But it's more powerful to hear it from, it's Russell Crowe's character saying this, and when you say it, and if you say it meaningfully and interestingly, there's actually room for imagination that could be even more traumifying than seeing it, actually, and really impactful when the audience feels them. So sometimes again, when you say things, again, this is the opposite of show don't tell, but I'm just kind of like showing you a little bit of the flip side of this, is if you say things like, oh, when I was a kid, I was kidnapped. And that's all he says, and he walks away. And then you're just like, how was he kidnapped? What was he kidnapped? What was his age? Who was kidnapped? How did he get back? All these things that you start to ask. Whereas if you show the flashback, it's very like precise. Like, this is how you have to show the process. So it becomes actually more precise. Whereas if you say something, you have room for a little bit of mystery. You can maybe, reveal more details of that later. But you just leave it like, oh, I had to escape. What did you escape? Where did you go? That's all he says, and he walks away. And that creates actually more intrigue than showing the flashback of it. And this is something I'm dealing with. I'm writing the sci-fi, and there's this backstory of these characters, and I found that my flashbacks have become overdrafts, become shorter and shorter and shorter, to now it's just one flashback that happens in the middle, and it's just the most meaningful, important, his trauma, where it comes from. That's all that we see, and that's all it is. All the other crap and all the other fat got cut out, and it's not like, oh, look at this cool stuff that I could show him as a kid and going through this thing. It's not about that, but it's just boils down to the meaningful flashback that I need to say. Something, we're almost coming towards our end. Something that is important you can think about is setting up something and paying off. Setting up information and then paying off. If a guy suddenly loses his money in the end, let's say he's Las Vegas gambling, what does that mean? If a millionaire loses $1,000, it's not very meaningful. But if he's like broke and very poor, if you set up, even in the beginning of the scene where you see his bank account, it's like only $1,005. He withdraws, he has $5 left. When he loses at the end, that's meaningful, impactful. That kind of the stakes, talking about the stakes of the scene, but you might have to set up the stake so it's more meaningful. So the payoff. Another technique is juxtaposing two scenes being intercut back and forth. How that creates kind of a cinematic poetry. This scene is a metaphor of this scene. If your theme is women empowerment, let's say, so you have the scene where a woman is being very empowered, is commanding, but you're also intercutting it with someone that's a woman that's getting beat up by the husband. That creates this juxtaposition. There's a theme of this sequence which you're trying to say. Hopefully you're trying to say something by this thing. It creates obviously intensity, a back and forth tempo, but also I like to write these intercut scenes. It's almost like they're talking to each other, but poetically. It's like I wish being stronger, some dialogues like was, if you're stronger together is better. And then in the juxtaposition, you see people working together. Like it's almost like one scene really. Thematically, it's one, but they're kind of juxtaposing each other and talking to each other. Writing those kind of scenes are more interesting and more meaningful, and it's like writing kind of visual poetry or montage or collage. That's important. Props, again, think about what your props are. Think about how you can use the props to increase drama. This breaks down. Oh, damn, I'm trying to fix this thing, but how I fix it in that conversation. I always, and this is something I struggle with in the beginning, and sometimes in my rewrites I go back, but I always try to give my characters something to do in the scene. So it seems A, realistic, and B, you can use their actions and the props they use to convey subtext and drama, emotions. I just give him, even if it's a boring scene, like, sci-fi has a lot of those scenes where you have to relay information about the world or a technology, but doing it through, I'm trying to sell you this. I'm a salesman, and here we're at a shop trying to sell, instead of just me saying information. Or I'm playing a game with a kid and playing hide and seek, but through that, I'm telling you how your technology, how your new eyes work, your bionic eyes. I don't know. Instead of just saying your bionic eyes work like bats echolocation, instead, have it in an action or a game through props. Reveal each scene. We went over kind of revealing traits. You can have running gags, that's for comedic effect. Things coming back. And again, when things come back in running gags, you want each time it comes back to be a little bit different than the other ways. It creates that meaning changes each time. So it's different. You have secrets. Think about secrets, how they're revealed, when they're revealed, what you want to show the audience or not, how long you want to keep the secret. A lot of people are like having the secret and the surprise, that twist. I'm building towards the twist, but sometimes building towards a twist can be a downfall because you're not milking what it means for the audience to know this information. It could create more suspense. Then the surprise might not be worth the suspense you could be building instead. So balancing both. Maybe you have it for a scene or two they don't know, and then what would it mean in Sixth Sense? If in the middle of the movie you found out that he was dead all along, it would probably change everything. And this movie is so twist based that's why it's so great. But just explore for a second, like how would the movie, if you found out in the middle, then the dramatic question or the dramatic structure would be different. It wouldn't necessarily be a less or worse movie. It could be something interesting and different. He just has to use a different format to compel the audience. Now it's about, how does he deal with being a ghost, or how does he have to keep the secret that he's a ghost from the kid? Like if the kid found out he's a ghost, he wouldn't respect him. So now it's about Bruce Willis keeping the secret, keeping a secret, which creates a new level of suspense. So sometimes the twist thing that you're thinking may be good, but maybe you bring it in a little bit earlier so you can milk a new type of question. This is something definitely that North by Northwest does a lot. Like when he decides to shift it and make the question be different. Now let me milk a different question by revealing information. It's not all a mystery. You have to slowly start to reveal information, but keeping the engine of your story going. And then you have your shock factors. You can have some interesting shock and thrills. Those are the surprises, basically. Have some of that come in too. Think about, again, this connects with your secrets. There's something called scene sweeteners, which are kind of like little things that you put in your scene to just give it some sweetness, some of that emotional sweetness. Those are usually those jokes. Marvel movies love to put in little humor. It works for a bit, but again, your whole scene can become sweetened. So you might not want that. All Marvel movies are a little bit sweetened. At least they are the more recent ones. In that there's always kind of these jokes, so it's not super intense all the time. There's always this kind of air of sweetness. So you can add, humor, joy, wit, these things, add a little mini bursts of sweetness, is called kind of. Subtext, again, we talked about. You can don't be on the nose too. When your character wants something, don't make it so direct. Like, I want to win the spelling bee, and I'm just like saying it. I want to be chosen to be president, but maybe it's like, oh man, I don't really want to be president, but I really like that car that comes with being president. I mean, I always wanted a car. The car, he doesn't really care about the car, but he cares about being president, really. But it's about something else. So don't be on the nose, because then your audience realizes, oh, that's what the point of this scene is. Oh, okay, cool. So you can also have contrast dialogue with action. There's a scene in is it You Got Mail or something, or at the end of the scene, it's like the guy's like, I love you, and the girl's like, I hate you, and then kisses her. It's like obviously the opposite of what is being said. So contrasting action and scene. So action actually speaks more than words. Words are not necessarily truthful. Actions are mostly truthful. So he can say something, but it's completely the opposite, because he's either hiding a secret or lying to them or deceiving them. But their actions are actually saying the truth of what they want to happen. Okay, so we're near the end, and now I'm just going to go into a little bit more specific, just dialogue. Just some things you should avoid when you write dialogue. Things you should avoid is wooden, stiff dialogue. It just doesn't flow like conversation does. Doesn't feel organic. Stilted, meaning it feels contrived. It feels like you forcing this just to get to a certain point or reveal exposition, and the audience is aware of the writer. You want to avoid this. Too expositional, too much information. Like, it's again why I had the last class is just to drill in emotion. We're emotion machines. We're not a documentary. If we're making about, even sci-fi is the worst at this, because it's a new world with new science. They just like think, I'm rewriting this thing. It's about medicine and whatnot. And they have all this medical jargon and stuff. And then I was like, no one gives a shit about how cool this doctor sounds. Like, you can use one sentence just to show that they know what they're talking about. But it's about emotion. Get to the emotion, get to the story. No one cares how, I guess that scene where the dinosaur, how the DNA, that's kind of super important. I want to know why there's dinosaurs in modern times. So there's that scene where he's doing the intro, and there's a little dino dude. And it's done as most interestingly as possible. It is straight up exposition, but they had to do this. And it's done in the most fun way. There's a fun guy, and then it opens up, and they see the laboratory, and then they stop. The guy's like, stop this boring lecture. I want to see that. He stopped, and he goes into the laboratory, and then it becomes an emotional scene about the birth of the raptor, and then the question, like, why are you making raptors? So this exposition suddenly turns into something dramatic. So they could have just had that scene be the whole documentary of the DNA dude, but they didn't do that. They had it in the beginning for a little bit, and suddenly they break that, and it's about emotion. So don't make it about exposition. Don't make it on the nose, like I was saying, like doing Try to avoid predictability in your dialogue. Don't talk too much. A lot of writers in the beginning just talk back and forth, talk. Again, if you read some scripts, you'll see how limited dialogue can convey a lot. Even with movies you thought was a lot about dialogue, you'll see is actually not. And again, this is something when you start to write and you make your movies, you realize, oh shit, dude, this actor is talking too much. Or in your editing room, it's like, this scene is like 6 minutes long. Like, why is there so? And now you have to cut it down. Now you're basically doing what you should have done, but the editor is doing the cutting down now. It's like, how can I cut out? Because it's so boring. You realize, like, I write things like this and I'm right in the editing room, like, oh, this is so boring. Why is he talking so much? Like, blah, blah, blah. So if you can really have that mindset, the editor room mindset in your writing, that saves a lot. And just like, don't talk too much. Avoid, chit chat. No one gives a crap about chit chat. Your characters, like, obviously in real life you do chit chat, but make your chit chat about subtext or about something. Don't have that. Talk too much. Don't have your characters talk alike. Have voices. See what kind of words they use. If he's a sexist, maybe he's using like word and like, hey sweetie pie, or things like that. Maybe she is really from a background that's not very educated, but she's trying to be educated, so she's using big words. Think about voices of your characters, keeping them different. A teacher would ask me, your reader should be able to open any page, point at a dialogue, not see who the character is, read the dialogue, and know who your character is just by the way they talk. That dialogue, or that type of talk, is only that character would say that. That's something, you really, some good writings you see, because people are so different, but you are one person writing this, and you're gonna automatically kind of channel your characters through your filter of life experiences. Really try to observe and build up a knowledge of other types of people that exist. And you may be a feminist, but your character is a sexist. Really talk about how would a sexist talk, or a power maniac. You may be like, everyone should be equal, but this character is not like that. So get it, and not make them also be a cliche womanizer, saying the cliche things we see in movies. Like, see the subtle depth, subtleties of being, little things, that are also realistic. People don't really say, hey, sweetie pie, sugar lips. Like, people don't say that anymore. After Me Too, like, if you're writing about, people don't say that's gonna be obviously a womanizer you're writing. So but there are still womanizers and chauvinists. They do exist. They've changed. So how can you subtly bring in chauvinism if that's what your character needs? So avoiding the cliche stuff and making it more subtle through actions, maybe. Avoid those filler things. We like to be like, so I was thinking, blah, 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 blah. Just avoid it. To say what he was thinking. So I was thinking you should really change your wardrobe. It's like how he just looks at them. It's like, you should change your wardrobe. Because the actor can convey that however is needed to. If he's like not sure about it, then you're like, you should change your wardrobe. If it's a question. So just go. Don't have those filler words at the beginning or at the end. Just go to cut out that stuff. And also less is more. Your dialogue becomes shorter, and that's just better. Avoid chit chat. Don't avoid obvious repetition. If someone's already been stated that he is he's a cheater, don't have to say it again. It's already been established. Don't have your dialogue be about that, because it's just repeating information. So avoid that. Cool. This is kind of like what my lecture for today was about. In the John Truby's writing exercise, the very last thing is writing scenes, and he has a set of questions. You know, what is the scene position? What is the problem? The strategy used? All these things. You can use that as your kind of checklist before you start a scene. I use my own checklist. My checklist I use is I have a set of things like story point, John Truby story point. So I force myself to put this in a category. Is this a revelation scene? Is this a plan scene? Is this a attack by ally scene? You know, one of those 22 points. It can be more than one of them. Then I have the purpose. What is the purpose of this scene? You know, I write that. And then I have want. What do my characters want? What are the obstacles is the next one. Then I have something called costs. Like what sacrifice is made. Like the character might want something, but because they want something, you know, a character might want to spy on that guy. By wanting that, she gets found out, or she drops the binoculars when she leaves, and now the guy is suspicious of her. You know, so there's consequences for what want. So I have costs there. What is the cost to get what they want? What happens as a repercussion of the scene, basically. Then I write subtext. You know, so I know what the purpose is. So what can I use as subtext to convey that? So it's not on the notes. You know, if this scene is about, you know, it's about the guys trying to convince you. I need to send in the special ops unit to really use brute force to solve this. And the lady is like, no, let's use finesse. You know, so I use subtext. Now I think about where the scene is going to be, what visual metaphors can I make it. So now I make it set in the armory or something, or I make it set, there's like suit of armors, or there's antlers, you know, these all are a metaphor for what is being said, meaning using brute force. But those things are all for show. You know, our suit of armors are barely ever used, and they're not very practical. And the character, you know, maybe is like, you know, suit of armors were never really practically used in medieval times. That's all she says. She doesn't say outright use finesse. She says subtext. That's the beauty of subtext. It's metaphorical subtext. So there's many things your audience can get out of it. You're not direct, so it leaves room for a lot of kind of mystery. Like, what exactly is she meaning by that? Is she angry? Is she happy? Is she sad? Leave a little room for that interpret. So it's subtext. So that's one of my checklists. So I always force myself to find a subtext. How can this be conveyed metaphorically, possibly, instead of directly? And it's more interesting that way and more realistic. Then another thing I ask is learn, which is a revelation. What does my character learn? What's new information my audience learns? So I force myself to add some new information in this. And when I have these checklists, when you have a checklist, you kind of force yourself, you think you have a scene already, and you might write your treatment, but then you force yourself to like, oh, I have to have new information. What is some new information? Oh, maybe he finds out that, oh, she's pregnant here. Oh, let's put that in there. Oh, maybe the audience finds out that he is actually cheating in this thing. You know, like forcing myself to reveal new information. And then some things you might think that, oh, I wanted to reveal that later in the movie. You bring it in earlier, and now you have more things I have to learn as I go. It's like, oh shit, I already used that up, so I have to find new things to learn throughout. So I keep it engaging and revelations happening. Then I have my start and my end. How does my character start? How does it end? What is the change that happening? That could be mad to sad, something simple like that. Or it could be emotions. It starts off suspenseful, but it ends hopeful. Again, when I force myself to find these emotions, I force myself to write for not just conflict, but for character change within that scene. And you'll find interesting ways, you know, things where I thought my character's just angry with that person or suspicious of that person. When I force myself to think about start and end, I find myself, oh, she starts off suspecting, but then ends up hopeful, you know, like, oh, where your suspicion whatever happens in that scene, the character changes her mind into thinking hopefully. Well, what happened there that you go from suspense to hopeful? And that forces you to create some kind of dramatic scene that things must shift. Then I have a thing, just emotion. Again, kind of thing, what are the emotions that are in these scenes? Happy, thrill, even if it's small ones. And then I could compare what is the emotion before. Let's try to come up with some new emotions in the scene. Alfred Hitchcock was like, oh, suspense, suspense, suspense. And then when the lady comes in, oh, now we have a little bit of different emotion, love, passion. So he's kind of changing it up. Maybe this scene is about empathy, just kind of getting into before we had so much we have 3 scenes of intensity and suspicion. Let's make this about empathy. That's what this emotion is going to be. Also, it forces you to push emotions in there, and as many emotions as you can. That's realistic. And then last, I have something which is symbol. For me, it means what is this scene symbolize in the greater context of the movie. And it could be something very metaphorical, like, sometimes I like to think when I write movies, and people have these theories, film theories of movies, and it's kind of cool, like how this guy dedicated like hours of research to trying to figure out. And when movies have like don't say everything and they just leave room for film theories, like for example, Us. I don't know if you've seen what's his name? Keenan Peele, right? Keenan. Which one is it? Keenan Peele, right? Who is it?
That's 2 people.
No, but
Jordan
Peele. Yeah. He did Get Out. Awesome, amazing. Again, so much metaphor, and it's not all said. But Us, I don't know if you've seen it. I won't give it away, but it's if you see the film theory, sometimes when you see film theories, it makes the movie so much more awesome. And you see the film theory of oh, please do. It's gonna add that. There's another layer to this movie that, and it's not just theory. I'm pretty sure it's what it is. It adds a whole other content. There's like a whole hidden movie in this movie, and it's awesome. What
Which
does
movie?
this symbolize?
Which one talking?
Us.
Which movie?
It's just called Us.
Us. Yeah, okay. I've seen it.
Yeah. Great. It's the whole movie is very symbolic movie. Symbolize a lot of.
Where do you get the theoretical write-up?
If you just Google like the meaning behind Us or meaning behind any movie you think is someone has written something or a show done a thing about it, and it's quite interesting. This one has a lot of film theories behind it because it's so. And Jordan Peele, a lot of his stuff is about racism, but symbolically done. Race is like a new genre. It's like racism horror, and again, it's not direct. It's through metaphors. So you have to interpret it. And so when you have movies like this that is meant for interpretation, you want to think about what is the symbolization of this scene? What does this scene symbolize? Okay, it's just about a white kid dissecting a black mouse. That's all it is. But if my scene is about how the white man is keeping the black man down, that's what that means. So, okay, so I have that in my symbol section, but I'm not going to make it, I want it to be so hidden that it's not even like an audience doesn't even get it right away. Only like film theorists get it. Like that's how hidden this symbol is. So then I really should know what this symbolizes, and then keep it as hidden and mysterious and not open to interpretation. If you keep it open, then people will think about it more, engage with it more, and come up with like 1,000 different, and they'll have arguments in the comment section, and like that makes it much more. If that's the type of movie that you want to make, where things are a lot very symbolic, and having the symbols be as hidden and secretive, and not on the nose or cliche, as possible. Race is quite a cliche topic. It's been done a lot straightforward, but what Jordan Peele is doing is really taking this cliche topic to a very new, refreshing, unpredictable place. You know, so you can take themes that have been done a billion times, but you can totally put it in a new setup, and just see what things now symbolize, what things used to symbolize before. You know, in the racist overcoming racism movies, there's usually this guy, the white guy who used to be racist, through some reason becomes not racist and helps the black person or helps the minority. And a lot of these racism films get flack for giving that white man or woman the more important emotional arc. Like, oh, look at the white guy changing. It's all about the white guy changing. So that's an important, like a cliche trope in racism films. Now, okay, now I know this symbol. Now let's take that and do it totally differently. You know, how can I rethink this trope in a cliche, in a new way? So when I do, I have my checklist, and I could send this checklist, or you can come up with a new checklist based on what's important to you before you write a scene, and see that you're milking the full possibility of the scene as much as possible. And obviously you're going to do rewrites and you're going to do it more and more. But again, once you plan more before, it becomes more easier to write it, and less rewrites. So yeah, that's pretty much it for today's class. And I think right now we're gonna start to get into scene writing. We're gonna all download Final Draft, which is a script writing program. You can get it for free. I'll send the links. I know, Laura, you already have it, but it makes life a lot easier. You don't have to do the formatting. The formatting is like not important. It is important. Formatting is important because a bad formatted script, automatically your reader's like, what the hell? So that should never be an issue because the software does it. And I'm not going to go into like technical screenwriting, formatting stuff. Some minor things we'll go over. But right now I would like to get into writing scenes and reading scenes. It's hard to read if there isn't enough people. I'll see why people didn't join, or if the timing doesn't work. I don't know what happened, or maybe people didn't
We
forgot.
can try a different time if that's better.
Yeah, I'll try to start a conversation on email. But I think a lot of people are now finding they just watch the recording later, and they do the stuff. But if I'm gonna do readings, it would be nice. We're gonna slowly go more into engagement, because that's really the main tool right now with this. You know, you could just watch lectures on screenwriting, but having us talk. And a big thing about screenwriting is building up that skin, tough skin, to be able to share and get feedback and realize, oh, it's not working, or not feeling bad if someone says, you know, this is crap, go rewrite it. That's the biggest thing that I took away from my classes, is that we write it, we sit there, we're like nervous to read it in front of all our peers who, you know, we may idolize, we may really look up to. And, you know, I had a friend who was like, he's such a great writer, and I would always be afraid, like, what is this guy? What's he got to get shit on it or something? But this is the most important part. This is the asset. I always start to create writing groups so I could like get most opinions from, because you might have an idea of how it's working, but you know, your characters are from other backgrounds, other people. You might want to bounce it off people who know that. You know, men writing women sometimes is an issue sometimes, you know, like that's not how, or any other group of people. We think we have an idea, or we think we're writing an empowering character, but actually it's a stereotypical version of the empowerment, whereas the nuances is more important. Then you get that feedback. I wrote characters that were Jewish in NYU, and it didn't gel with the Jewish readers because that's not what they deal with, or it was my idea of it. And it could come off as offensive sometimes if you don't know. There's a movie as Extraction. Everyone's like, oh, it doesn't represent Dhaka, whatever. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I don't really want to see it, but maybe I'll see it just for Dhaka. There's the balance of like, maybe it's just the action movies for fun. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be so realistic. And other people are like, no, you misrepresented Dhaka. Da, 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 da. But misrepresentation in Hollywood has been going on for so long, and it doesn't mean it's justified necessarily just because they've been doing it. It's because mostly white males have been writing these movies about the world, which is not mostly white males. So they just don't really get into the brains of the characters sometimes. So that helps when you're doing feedback. And a lot of the times you'll get a feedback. You write, in my early stages, I wrote, most of my characters are all male. And then my female friend read it and was like, why don't you make this more women? I was like, yeah, you're right. Why not? So I just like switched it, and then I made them being a woman more integral to the story. But maybe it doesn't have to be integral to the story. It could just be she's a woman and doing the same stuff that's happening. So feedback is important. Building that tough skin to take comments. Rewriting is really the huge important aspect of this. And you do that through feedback. You have feedback for yourself, obviously, but you get a lot of, and sometimes if you have a mystery thing, like, are you giving enough information? Is your audience getting it? Are they confused? You get that from rewrites and reading. So we're going to get into that soon with this class, because I pretty much ran out of stuff to talk about. I'm done talking. Now we're just going to discuss and read and stuff, whatnot. Cool. Any questions?
Great. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. See you guys later.
And you said you can get final draft for free. Final draft you can get for free.
Yeah, pirated. It's pirated. I'll send you the link. It's pretty easy. Yeah.
It's not risky. It's not going to mess up the computer.
No. It's really basic. It's not a very common software, so they don't really make viruses so much for it or anything like that. It's just, I've never had a problem with it.
Okay.
But if you want to buy it, you can to support.
But I want to start first, just want to try and use it first before buying.
Sure. Yeah.
Later.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any questions? Anything? You guys have any? Nothing? Cool.
Sorry, the event's going, so I can't really.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, okay, cool. All right, cool. With that, on that holy note, we will adjourn for today. Thank you for having me and having us in your living room. I'll see you guys next week. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.